Hello and good morning, everybody. Jerry Hanley from Viking Performance Training here with my good friend Jonathan Pishner of Apex Counseling on today's live showing of Asymmetric Habits, where we basically focus on small changes you can make to have out or outsized positive differences in your life. And today we're talking about playing to win instead of playing not to lose. If you're involved in the sports world, you might hear this pretty often. Otherwise, it may be something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. But I promise you that as soon as we do start talking about it, you'll notice a lot of things that come up, either decisions you make or decisions other make, because these are some pretty common thought patterns here. So, playing to win. This isn't necessarily a sports thing. I mean, I come from the sports world. I already made one sports analogy, but we're talking about winning in so many different ways. Whether it's your fitness and health journey, this can be investments. This can even just be on self improvement goals that you have, and you set yourself things you want to get better at. We as people, there's this crazy weird perspective shift that I can't wait to hear what JP has to say about. That as we make progress on these things, a lot of times we're tempted to slightly change from the decision making and the mindset that helped us make that progress, basically winning, and slightly shift it into a more defensive attitude, such as we want to try to not lose what we've gained or not lose the positioning we have. And so often, due to just the crazy way the universe seems to work, a lot of times that small shift ends up having a much bigger impact and can cause us to basically grab defeat from the jaws of victory, or at least lose a lot of the hard-earned progress that we've made. So I'm definitely curious on this one, JP. Like, what is it that happened this year, from the mindset perspective for people?
Well, my suspicion would be that if you researched it and got a 10,000 or 100,000 person study, you'd find that most of it's fear of different flavors.
Mm.
Because I know in this much smaller sample size of the counseling office, that's almost always what it is fear. So I'm suspecting that would generalize to a larger sample. But really, it's the fear of losing something, whether it's, I'm afraid I'm going to lose this job I worked so hard to get. If we're investing, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my money. I'm going to lose the big game. And so the fear of the loss causes people to make a behavior change. And the reason this is important, and what made me want to do this was actually a sports situation. So I counsel athletes, and through a coincidence, I happened to be at the event where one of the persons I counsel was playing their sport. And so, we do sports psychology stuff. And so I got to talk to them at their next session about like what was going on. And there were some behaviors I spotted. I was like, oh, I think they're in that defensive mindset. I think they're playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And we talked about it, and it turned out that was absolutely correct. And happily, it didn't end up being a defeat. But there were some moments where it's like, oh man, this play almost went badly precisely because of this mindset. But it, like you said, it generalizes to a lot of different places. I'll do a second example just to show that, and then we'll get into how to fix it and how to spot it. Uh, a lot of people will do this with their jobs. And the reason I wanted to talk about it today was because I rarely get to deal with it in the sports example. With my one person, I did, but I'm usually dealing with it with things like switching jobs or getting out of bad marriages or those kind of things. But if we think of a job, a lot of people will, they'll have put in their time and they've worked for this big promotion, and they got it, and as many jobs do over the course of time, just you get more responsibilities added on. You're not really making the amount of money you should be for what you're doing anymore. And it's time to play to win. It's time to either ask for a raise. It's time to start applying to new jobs. It's time to start doing something.
Hmm.
And what a lot of people will accidentally do is they'll be like, "Wow, man, I worked so hard to get here. I'm really not sure I want to risk losing it." And so they'll end up staying in a job that progressively gets worse and worse with more responsibilities, no added money. Maybe the manager is like bad and continues getting worse. But that defensive mindset of being afraid to lose the thing in the first little bit is not a problem, but as a pattern, it tends to put people in worse and worse and worse positions if it's not addressed.
Mhm. Man, that's so spot on. I hadn't even thought about that being fear the root cause, but as soon as you said it, it made sense. And with all the explanations, it does. And so often it's I feel like again, I'm really curious to see where this eventually goes. So much of it is because it's brand new territory a lot of times. And I feel like, we're automatically scared of either the brand new territory, or a lot of us are scared of just when we do make that territory falling back to where we were. And um especially because when I think about it, like I think about sports the fastest, the easiest examples. A lot of times you see this, and it's almost like when a new team is or a new athlete is trying to break through, and they're playing like say established powerhouses. Because by the way, this isn't an individual only thing. Like you can this mindset shift, this phenomenon happens with teams just as often as it does with individuals. So you definitely see that there's a either a greater mindset or planning or contagion. But anyway, to bring that back, a lot of times when playing your powerhouses or your people who are already expected or like who are already considered established, whether in sports or business or whatever, then they seem to be able to handle or like they get in these situations and come out on top more often than not. And that is because there is an experience aspect to winning, that the more you can start winning, then you're not as afraid of the situation, or you realize that that losing actually hasn't, like, you've lost before and you managed to still get back and win some more. There's no longer that fear of the unknown about what's going to happen, like, oh, like, what do I need to do? And it lets you play the way you actually feel like you should, and it lets you keep playing to win. There was a saying I remember reading at the end of last year, and it actually involves some coaching teams that or some teams I work with. And one of the coaches of a new up and coming team had posted this and talked about it. Like first, you just lose really bad. And then you keep losing a lot of times, but you lose the close games. You get in those close games and you lose them. And then that next step up is then you start winning some of the close games because you have the experience of being in the close games now. And then once you start winning the close games, that's when you start finally managing to win big and win often. And I said, he was talking about a team perspective in working upwards like that. And I thought about it. I was like, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense. And this year, I've seen that exact thing happen. Go like teams go from losing a lot to then losing a lot, but still having so many close games that could have gone the other way, just heartbreakers. But then from that experience and from going through that process and knowing they were so close, they were able to make the changes to this year, win the close games, and through that. Um, so I was like, all that is like a learning that the fear isn't as big as you think it's going to be, or simply learning how to handle the fear and perform through it anyway, and work your way up.
That's a great way to look at it when you can have a large sampling of what you're doing.
Mm,
So for the athlete who is going to play, let's say over the course of a career, just to pull a number out of thin air, 500 games. Uh, that's pretty good. One of the problems a lot of people run into is they're playing games where they
mm,
don't get that huge sample size. Let's look at a love relationship where you have to do something a little risky, like have a hard conversation with your partner. Well, unless you really screw up, you're not going to have 500 love partners over the course of your lifetime. If you are either really lucky or really unlucky, you're going to have 2 to 6 serious ones, which means any loss there is devastating. So the
mm,
fear is much more prescient because it's harder to imagine the idea of, oh, okay, I can bounce back from a loss. Whereas if we have, somebody who's an athlete, bouncing back from any specific loss is oftentimes pretty okay. If you when you get an undefeated streak broken or something, that particular one's a little tougher, but their sample size is much more advantageous. jobs, love partnerships, anything else where you're ideally going to have as few of them as possible, it's much harder to establish that mindset because it every loss seems bigger. So the
Mhm.
desire to play defense is going to be correspondingly larger. So if we
Man,
think
that's
of
good.
like, yeah, so if we think of like, okay, what can a person do to start establishing a mindset where they're going to play to win? But maybe they don't have the advantage of like just being in that situation where it's going to naturally happen, like an athlete. A person has to start intentionally coming up with ways to take the risks necessary to play to win. Um, One of the things I like about using poker as an analogy for this, not only have most people played it, but you can play any stakes. You can
Yeah.
play quarter poker, you can play dollar poker, you can play $10 poker, you can play $1 million poker if you're either crazy or ridiculously rich. Um, but it's a thing that's accessible to anyone. What's weird is even when you're playing 10-cent poker, most of us, until we've had a lot of exposure to being in losing positions, if we start getting low on money, we'll not want to bet. We'll want to like try and hoard it all, and then of course we
Mhm.
get in that defensive mindset, and we end up losing and being knocked out of the thing. But figuring out how to help people shrink down what their bets are to help them get acclimated to risks or imagined risks, that's often the tough part. Because if I imagine, oh, I need to have a hard conversation with my love partner, and I imagine, well, our relationship's already struggling, it might be hard for me to imagine how this is going to go well and how I can turn it into a win. In which case, why the hell wouldn't I play defense?
Mhm.
So in a way, you got to help people shrink it down to a manageable risk, which can be tricky because that starts to get very individualized and very difficult to like help people construct without a lot of effort.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, like, before we started on this, actually didn't hit me, yeah, how complex or how deep this topic could be. 'Cause it's like, it made total sense, but you blew my mind as soon as you mentioned, just all the situations most people find out in where the sample size is so much smaller. Um, and then, like, that made me also think about, how another skin in the game is another one. Like, you can't mentally wrap your mind around skin in the game without actually like having it, or like I said, like that type of feeling, like, okay, like this is a real conversation with a real person, like you're talking about with the relationship. Yeah, no matter how many times you run that through your head in the shower, in the end, like, yeah, it's like you either try to avoid it, probably not a good decision, or go have the conversation and see that it probably doesn't happen the way you thought of in the shower.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to force yourself to do that because if you imagine the stakes are half your stuff and half your time with your kids, and you don't know how to shrink the game smaller than that, I mean, who the hell is going to take that risk?
Yeah.
Now, I say all of that. I paint this entire problem knowing that there are plenty of ways to shrink the risk. So if you've reached this far listening to this episode, please don't imagine that we're going to state a problem and not have any ideas on what to do with it.
Right. I mean, yeah, so when it comes to teaching somebody how to have a more like winning situation mindset, like I want to actively work to getting the best result in this. So if you're an athlete, that means actively bust your ass to win the game. But that means, yeah, if it's a relationship thing, it's like I'm going to put myself out there, have the conversation, and do what I have to do to make this work, to make this work or get the healthy result out of it. Or same thing with the job. It's like, okay, if this is really like, okay, you're doing what you need to do job wise, you really need to get better compensated or better leverage or whatever it is, better situation. You're going to go have that conversation with your boss, your manager, and then if they give you a path to get there, you do it. Or if they don't and it's not feasible, you make the move to go and try to just go risk on and try to find a new job. So in all those situations, in the plethora more of them, like what are the ways that people can approach these situations without having the prior experience, that we said like athletes will build up over time. Um, to go into it with this mindset.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways, and it really depends on what position you start from. It's easiest if playing to win and playing not to lose, even if playing to win doesn't go well, if you'll get the same results. So that's the best place you can possibly be. So let's take it back to sports for a second, then we'll do other stuff. If a football team's already down by 50 points and it's the fourth quarter, you got to make a lot happen in a short amount of time. At this point, the absolute worst thing that can happen if you start pulling weird plays and trick plays out of your hat is you're going to lose and look stupid. You're already going to lose and look stupid if you lose by 50 points. There's functionally no difference. If you're in that position, it's a blessed position to be in because then you can do whatever you want. It's
Mhm.
actually the worst thing that can happen is there's absolutely no change in the outcome. So you can do anything.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
positive side of getting to try out new plays, getting experience for some of the younger backup players. There are a lot of positives that are there for the taking in that position. Again, it's still a loss, but there are definitely ways you can look at that and get things out of it.
sure, and the nice thing is since there's no reason not to just do whatever. It really opens up people if they can realize like, oh, there's really no difference here. Now I can play as hard as I want and I can play to win. Uh, that makes it the easiest because then you can get out of that fear of failure a little more readily because you're already 2 seconds away from it anyhow. But and then let's generalize that to let's say a work situation like you're afraid of potentially losing a job if you start applying other places or asking for raises or things. But uh, one of the things a lot of times we'll go through in the counseling room is, well, all right, how bad is this job? Oh, it's bad enough that it's actually impacting your health. Well,
Mhm.
okay, so basically, you're either going to end up taking enough sick time that they won't want you anyway, or you're going to keel over at some point and die at your desk. At this point, there's no point to not just go ahead and start applying for other jobs, asking for raises, asking for less work, because the end result is that you are not going to end up at this job for very much longer anyway, either because your health is going to fail you or because you're going to get something better. So,
Mhm.
if you can kind of figure out if you're in that position, then it doesn't matter. Now you can just do whatever you want.
Mhm.
It gets harder when you're in a different position. It gets much harder to figure out how to start taking risks when the horrifying consequences are further off and you've got to figure out like, okay, how do I play for better things without accidentally risking too much of what I have?
Mhm.
Uh, and really that part, instead of then figuring out what you should be doing to win, you should do one step before that, which is figuring out how to make the stakes reasonable.
Yep.
So like when I go play poker, I'll do a $20 buy-in. I don't mind to throw $20 away because I'm really not that good at poker. So I know I'm throwing my money away. You would never get me to play a $500 game
Mhm.
because I'm not skilled enough to play at those stakes, nor do I have enough money to be comfortable throwing $500 away. Same thing with when you're trying to figure out how to make good improvements to your life. Okay, how can I start playing this game at stakes that I like? Let's take the love partner thing. We've got to have a hard conversation with our love partner. Most people have something of an innate sense of, all right, how much can I ask for? How much of a problem can I bring up or ask them to change something? And they won't walk out of the door immediately. Most people have at least enough of an innate sense of a love partner that they can say, okay, well, let me make the stakes where they'll just be mad at me for a day if I bring this up, and that's the worst that can happen. Most people can kind of instinctively shrink it down to that. So it starts to be instead of not yet how do I play to win, it starts to be how do I shrink the stakes so that I'm not going to experience any huge loss. And then, all right, now what do I need to do to produce better results for myself at those stakes?
Mm.
Because I'm using an extended metaphor, I'm always worried that I'm not making good sense. Am I making good sense as I say that?
No, yeah, yeah, I think I'm definitely
Oh,
following you.
okay, good.
Because it actually it brought up a good point to my mind. Um, right, risk management. I mean, a lot like in 2 words, that's
Yeah.
a big part of it, and that is something that I feel like just a lot of people don't realize how widespread risk management can be or is. Like, most people who've achieved pretty high levels or just even decent levels in just about anything have some concept of what risk management means in their position or to what they're focused on. Like, there's risk management in investing, or I mean in gambling or something like you mentioned with poker, like you said, like $20, okay. But no matter how much it is, if you're throwing in 100% of your pot on one bet, that risk management is pretty low unless you know you got one of the best hands in the world right there. And this is a common thing with investing is people will compound their gains or whatever, make one or two terrible investment decisions and lose all of it because they're just not managing that risk well. And it's in sports, it's in health and fitness. Like going for a terrible decision on a new like bench press max that is not in your wheelhouse. It's like, okay.
Can I let me actually put, if we're going to talk about it this way, let me put it on a different example that everybody listening to this will understand, and even more so if they're local to here. Driving. Driving is all about risk management. You put your seatbelt on for 0.0001% of your day and 0.0001% extra discomfort. You get maximum returns on safety. So basically, you're stupid if you don't wear your seatbelt. And your drive speed and your speed around turns and your paying attention to signals. All of it is risk
Mhm.
management. And the reason I said if you're local, you'll get this. Um, I actually deliberately stopped many of my commutes down to Clarksburg because the stretch of I-79 between here and Clarksburg is dangerous enough with traffic and with wrecks and with road work. It's almost not worth it from a risk management perspective.
Mhm.
There's not a lot
Yep.
going on down there that I'm terribly interested in
Yep.
to take that 1% increased risk. But if we take that idea and we put it on, because the same thing with driving, you're playing to win. I want to get to a place where I would like to be, and I can drive the speed limit, which is relatively safe. I can drive 5 to 10 miles under the speed limit, which is a little bit safer. I'm not sure how much safer, but it's a little safer. Or I can speed, which is less safe, but it gets me there quicker. We're all used to this risk management calculus. Just most people are so unused to it in these other situations that they
Mhm.
don't they don't allow themselves to access a skill set that is actually already pre-existing within them, because
Yep.
almost everybody does risk management somewhere, and they damn sure do it in driving, but probably in many other places too.
Yeah. That actually takes me right into the next part that I wanted to mention, which is transferring things you've learned or picked up in like skills and mindset from other parts of your life to the things you want to improve or are focused on now. Like when you were talking earlier about, I mean, yeah, fear, like the fear of losing and that making like that slight change, which causes a lot of people to stop doing the things that were working. This is where I feel like so many people do get in tunnel vision. I feel like, especially if it's a newer or scary situation, not realizing how many things they've been through before that could, but in a way, have already prepared you for this. They may not have prepared you for it again specifically, but they probably prepared you for a broad range of the possible consequences and the emotional reactions you'll have and how to continue on from that point. Like, and again, there's an entire other level to this, and that would be, whether it's like trauma based. I'll let you get into that later if you want to, but
I probably will not be trying to get into
yeah,
that in this episode.
yeah, like
That's too
I
too
mean, 'cause
much.
that changes things, but this is where lessons you pick up other places. Like this is one of the positive lessons that people can pick up being an athlete or in sports. It's like, okay, you learn how to practice, you learn how to put effort in, and you learn how to hopefully work hard, you learn how to hopefully work as a team, you learn how to hopefully take direction well, like, positive criticism well, and apply all these things, and you still may not always win a championship. And those are lessons you can take and put them into, yeah, like your workplace, your environment, teamwork, all those things. And again, also the lesson that it may not come out exactly the way you want to, but theoretically those are all lessons you pick up in something like sports and can apply to other parts in your life. But same thing, whether it's like band, or doesn't it have to be youth, like these don't have to be youth activities, just things you pick up along the life from any situation you've had before, where you fell down, picked yourself back up, got to dust yourself off. Those are skills that you're building, which can help you. Like the more you can kind of remember, just like, oh yeah, like things have happened and I've been fine. When you get in scary situations, it can make the fear window smaller. Like you're saying, like bringing that part smaller.
Yeah. And the exposure to it, the more comfortable you get with it, uh, the easier it is to expose yourself in that way.
Mhm.
Something I just realized that I failed to mention something from a question you asked earlier, which was we were talking about like, okay, what can people do? Well, one of the things we didn't get into was addressing the fear itself and not realizing that fear is part of the price. So back to the athlete
Oh,
example.
that's yes.
Back to the athlete example. Like one of the things about playing a sport is almost always you have to play at the edge of risks in order to win. So like I mean with a nice easy example. Uh when we're watching football, a pass play is riskier than a running play. It can gain you a ton more yards usually, but it's riskier because you got a lot of air time where that ball can either get slapped down, intercepted, you got to put it in the right spot. Just mathematically, it's a riskier play. But as far as gaining yards on the field, you have a chance to gain an awful lot of yards out of it.
Mhm.
Any sport is like that. Like the combat sports I do, when you are boxing or when you are grappling, as soon as you make an attack, you expose yourself to counterattack. You can only stay perfectly defended if you do nothing and you basically stand there. As soon as you attack and try and score points or try and score a knockdown or a knockout or a submission, you're exposed to something now happening to you. And a lot of people accidentally make up uh, that they can somehow manage their life without exposure to any sort of
Mm.
bad consequences
There we go.
and without exposure to maybe even to fear itself. You know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was very popular on the internet. Like people are much more in tune with it now. But it was kind of the awakening of how the 9 to 5 work 40 years and get a nice cushy pension retirement plan is a dead model. A lot of people are still trying to exercise that model because they imagine it's the safer one, and it's not anymore. It's used to be maybe, but it's not. And they're playing a lot of games where they're trying to minimize any exposure whatsoever, not realizing you can be fired tomorrow for anything. There was a popular video within the last few weeks of some dude who found out he just wasn't getting a pension when he thought he was after 40 years.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, that was brutal. Um, but a lot of people don't realize that the exposure to risk and fear is part of the game, whether you want it to be or not. So they accidentally play this defensive mindset in everything or in something that's important and not realize they're exposed anyway. So you may as well try and work on winning and having less fear of the exposure because it's there anyhow.
Mhm. For sure. Like that part about yeah, just going through and trying not to expose anything. I mean, that's key. It's funny because a lot of people don't know this about me now, which is crazy because it was such a big part of my life. But I mean, yeah, I mean, an enormous part of my life for about 10 years, and really what got me into the deep dive of strength and conditioning was combat sports. So like I said, same as you with martial arts and MMA. And it was everything from boxing, kickboxing, MMA, submission grappling, you name it, point sparring, like, I mean, like the whole shebang. And I'll never forget one of the books that I read in that time frame, or first read about it, because I read it 3 times, I think, was is A Fighter's Heart by Sam Sheridan. And I'll never forget one line in it mentions that when you start fighting, like again, being about actually that, when you start fighting, the volume on the rest of your life turns down. And and I took that, especially now since I haven't fought in 15 years or whatever. It's one of those things where I mean, I can totally see how that's actually applicable for so many other things too. Is just when you've gone, like, yeah, when you've gone through harder times, when you've snuck out with wins and you've also had losses, all of it, it does turn down the volume on like how worried you are about those things in other cases. You might be worried from a very objective sense. Yeah, like holy crap, like these bills are piling up. This debt is piling up. Like you might be where you like that can definitely happen, but the sense that you are able to handle these things like improves the more you go through it and come out and do come out the other side. Like that's a key part. So I mean, yeah, that's why coming out and getting like giving it a shot, but then getting some wins is so crucial for people.
Well, let me make that usable,
Yes. Thank you.
because that's there's a key point that
I
is
just give you raw
missing in that. Not
materials.
yeah, not because he didn't write it correctly, but that he probably did something instinctively that some people need to do intentionally. Um, and I'll even give a perfect example since you're bringing up the combat sports example and from this book. Uh, I was having a conversation in the gym the other day with somebody who was terrified of having a potentially difficult conversation with a love partner. And they are a type of person who not only are they not afraid at all to be punched in the face, they may very well, just let you punch them in the face for $20. Like they have no physical fear
Mm,
whatsoever.
yeah.
But other fears are made manifest. Now, one of the things that people who want to use that idea intentionally can do is connect their fearlessness in one place to the place where they want fearlessness. Like, okay, hold on. I'm completely unafraid of somebody punching me in the face, kicking me in the head, or sitting on top of me and choking my lights out. Why in the world am I afraid to have this conversation
Yes.
with my love
Yes.
partner?
That is key.
Yeah, and a lot of people can connect that uh, if they do it intentionally. It's hard to do it instinctively without that missing piece. But if you know that you have fearlessness in one area, and especially if you're completely unafraid of horrible consequences, you get this with people who grew up poor. If you lived on a piece of white bread and one piece of bologna, and that was your dinner, uh, you'll still have fear in your life whenever you try and play to win. But if you can connect, wait, hold on, what am I worried about losing? Am I worried about being poor again? Am I worried about losing my job? I've already been there. I survived that. Because fear is instinctive. If you leave it alone, the human brain will always want to drift towards it because brains are dumb that way. Um, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Evolutionarily, that was wonderfully important, but it's
Mm.
less important now. So, but connecting that and deliberately selecting fearlessness, especially if you've already been in the negative consequence and you know how to solve it, is absolutely a thing you can do.
There we go. Yeah, that connecting is a very, very key part to the whole thing. Um, sorry, so let's wrap up some action steps here. So I've got at least two halves that I want this to happen. The two halves that I want us to wrap up.
I was gonna
One,
say if you have more than two halves, you've done your math wrong.
touche. Okay. So one is the action steps for people looking to develop that winning mindset the first time, or to take that step over the line and win?
Oh, sure. Just ask the small question. I mean, that's
It makes more sense chronologically this way.
okay. So the big thing is really knowing there's a difference, knowing that playing to win and playing not to lose are in fact two completely separate things. If you can't
Mhm,
start there, you're going to have trouble with the rest. Uh, so first, step one, know there's a difference, and know that there is almost no way to minimize your exposure to some level of risk. So you may as well select levels of risk that have some chance of getting you the life you want, as opposed to just covering up, playing defense, and maybe you get stuff and maybe you don't.
mhm. And awareness is the key factor in that to begin with. Like so often in these talks that we have, being aware of when something is happening is clutch.
Well, we say it so often. I sometimes worry that we get on this episode and we're basically turn on the camera. We're like, hey, be more aware of stuff, and just shut the camera off and walk off. Like,
Gonna start seeing it written on the walls behind us. Stuff like that. All right, then the second half is, for people who what they're doing has been working. So it's like, okay, keep playing to win. Again, keep playing to win. Don't make decisions that like suddenly make you stop doing the things that are helping you out. So that's the one that's the second half. Is for these people, what you've been doing has been working. So don't stop and start playing differently because you're afraid you'll lose it.
let's actually say it how it will really happen. Um, when you notice you have started playing defensively, because you will instinctively want to do it at some point. Notice as quickly as possible is number one, but then reconnect with that you're wanting to win in your life or in your for athletes it's in your sport, for other people just whatever area of life we're talking about. And if you start playing just purely defense, you're not going to end up in the winning situation. You're going to end up in an okay situation sometimes, but most people who are one extracting gracious wanting to extract something from this episode are probably in a bad spot in some way or another. And knowing that you have to deliberately expose yourself to a little more risk, it, and that there's no way to minimize it, is going to be the thing to remind yourself, because then it's a little more comfortable to get back into playing to win. If you accidentally believe that you can somehow just play defense forever and do okay, it becomes a much more friendly option. I mean, take any heck, even one of the more dangerous sports when it comes to risk, weightlifting. You want to get your next lift and you want to lift heavier, you're going to risk an injury. Period. End of story.
Mhm.
And learning to be comfortable with that and knowing how to bounce back from it is going to be important. But same thing with all the other areas. Yeah, if you get into a tough conversation with your boss about a raise or about they need to take some work off of you, that could end up going badly. But you're not going to end up in a winning position otherwise. So figuring out how to take the risk and get out of that fearful defensive mindset is going to be the key.
Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Well, good stuff, brother. Again, always appreciate this time that we have together coming into these conversations. Again, for those of you listening, hope this helped out. If you're listening on the recording or you're looking for a recording of these episodes, again, we are in podcast land, meaning Spotify and Apple Podcasts both can find us. Asymmetric Habits. There are, over 20 episodes at this point. We've been putting out a new episode every middle of the week. We either put up, recent live ones and combinations of ones we've recorded going back, 2.5 years at this point. So it is a wealth of finding out a lot of good stuff to listen to. Share it with people you love. Holidays are coming up. This is a great time that a lot of people go through some harder times, unfortunately. So, like we'll be talking about that coming up in the next few episodes, but also just a good time to bring up a lot of the things we talk about on this show and maybe expose some of these people to asymmetric habits. So, again, on behalf of JP and I, signing off. We'll catch all you guys later and have a great day.
See y'all.